In order to graph an absolute value inequality, there are a few things you first have to recognize. The vertex of an absolute value inequality is located inside of the absolute value and outside. So identify both pieces. The x value of the vertex is -2, the opposite of whatever happens to be in the equation or inequality. And the y value is +1, which is exactly what was written in the inequality. I'm going to graph my vertex, -2, +1. The next thing you have to identify is whether or not it opens up or down. That can be found by looking at the absolute value portion and determining if it's positive or negative. In this case, it's positive since nothing is written outside of it. So it's going to open up and have this shape. Next, you need to determine if it's going to be a dotted line or a solid line when you graph. Our inequality symbol says that our values can be equal, therefore it will be a solid line when we draw in our inequality. I'm going to quickly sketch that in. And lastly, we need to figure out how to shade. Since our y values has to be less than or equal to our absolute value inequality, we're going to shade below where all the y values get smaller. I usually start at the vertex of my absolute value graph in order to figure out where above and below actually means. Starting at the vertex, going below is just straight underneath it. So I'm going to shade down here, which is underneath the entire graph. Shading on this entire side and not to cross over the graph itself. And you're complete. Here's one more example. The absolute value of x -3, and all of our y values need to be greater than this quantity. Again, identify the vertex. Since nothing is added or subtracted inside of the absolute value quantity, there is no change, and your x value stays 0 for the vertex. But we subtract a quantity of 3 on the outside, so it's at -3 for our y value. On our graph, remain at the origin and simply go down 3 spaces to graph your vertex. Next, determine if your absolute value quantity opens up or down. Our quantity is a positive absolute value, so we're going to open up and have this general shape. Next, determine if your line is dotted or solid. Since our y values do not equal this quantity on the right, we're going to have a dotted line. And I'm going to sketch that in very quickly here, creating our V shape for the absolute value graph. And lastly, determine whether or not you're going to shade above the graph or below the graph. Our y values need to be greater than this quantity, so that would imply we are going to shade above our line that we had drawn. So we're going to shade above. And again, begin at your vertex, and above means on top of. So I'm going to go above or up from my vertex to know that I have to shade on this side of the line. Shading in the entire thing. And you are done with your graph.